Hello, everyone. Welcome into the unofficial Magic the Gathering books podcast, whatever it is. I know you didn't anticipate to hear from me, I being Urza Planeswalker, but our humble narrator was feeling a bit embarrassed and uneasy about a voice for a new character that has made an appearance on this current journey, that being the librarian, whom he thought it, is it who or whom he thought sounded a bit like me, Urza Planeswalker. Librarian, come here, come here.
Who, me?
Did you say whom?
What?
What?
Huh?
What? Nothing. You sound nothing like me.
I'm not you.
Oh, I know.
Yes, I know.
Why do you say it like that, like you don't want to be me?
I'm not going to be responsible for your deeds.
Oh, my deeds! I am so glad I'm not a part of this.
Yes, me too.
Oh, you have some brass ones on you, don't you? Just be gone. Get out of here. That guy is the worst. Anyway, join the Patreon, whatever, yada yada. I don't care. Enjoy the show.
Ertai's Tale. Novi Braddock. One of the things that made Baron such an excellent teacher was his practice of bringing me into his study from time to time to evaluate my progress. I'm always delighted to hear such an expert recount my virtues, so these sessions in his tower was something I looked forward to with great anticipation. At the last such session, seated behind his desk of blue jade, he began as he always did. Ertai, you are a most astonishing apprentice. Yes, I acknowledged. I was seated before him, but I let my gaze wander out the window down into the lotus vale, where the fields of flowers shifted colors in the breeze. Such a sentence was a preliminary to a discussion of my recent accomplishments. There's a formula, not that I tired of hearing it. Your memory of spells, your subtle sense of shifting energies, your artfulness as a young wizard all continue to amaze me. You are a credit to this island and to all who have studied the magical arts here. I know, I said, and I knew as well the words that always came next. You have tremendous native ability. I was so accustomed to those words following the others that when he said, however, there is one difficulty, I said, thank you. Ertai. I turned to find his gray eyes studying me. I said and stopped. I opened my mouth again, but no words came out. After a momentary struggle, I managed to utter in a strangled voice, difficulty? What about my tremendous native ability? I wanted to add. If Baron noticed my changed voice, he gave no sign of it. A difficulty, yes, a shortcoming, if you will. A shortcoming? He looked as if this discussion pained him. This isn't easy to confront you with. Confront me, as if I committed some crime. Master Baron, I stand falsely accused. I am, as you know, scrupulously honest. There we touch on the matter, he said, leaning forward. Ertai, this does have to do with your honesty. Some would call it by other names. I thought about that. If you mean what some of the other apprentices say, they are wrong, I said tentatively. They accuse me of boasting. However, I merely tell the truth, and it sounds like boasting to them. Can I help it that their skills are meager compared to I was going to say my tremendous native ability, but Baron interrupted me once more. I don't think it's a matter of your trampling on the feelings of others. The truth is, Ertai, I think the feelings of others are all but invisible to you. Brilliant though you may be with spells, in social relations you are a little slow. Slow. Me. Absurd. This is a shortcoming you must address, especially now that everything is about to change. Change, Master Baron? That's the first part of the change. Call me Baron. Plain and simple. You've long since earned your vestments as a wizard adept. He stood and went to the oaken wardrobe that bore the jagged sigil of lightning on its door. With a wave of his hand, he discharged the spell into the ceiling and the clear blue sky above. The island of Talaria crackled and boomed with the flash and thunder, and sparks of electricity still danced between the doors as he opened them. Your tunic and chain, he said, bringing them to me. Put them on. Some wizards may doubt they will earn this moment. I never had. All my previous discomfiture vanished. The only question remaining in my mind was if Baron could bear to lose me as a student. I slipped the tunic over my shoulders, fastened the chain about me. I would look quite elegant wearing them. No surprise. I wear most anything with elegance. It's a matter of posture, you see, and a handsome build. And now, Baron said, I must point you toward an opportunity. And he began to speak. There were 3 strangers in Talaria, strangers to me, at any rate. One was Baron's daughter, who had returned after a long absence. Another was a Benalish master-at-arms who wore throwing knives and a swagger. Last was a cat warrior whom I'd seen in Baron's garden, sunning herself on the stones. The Benalish is called Gerrard, said Baron. He is heir to a collection of artifacts known as the Legacy. You know, of course, what I'm talking about, how important those objects are. In truth, I paid little attention to artifacts during my studies. There are a few artifacts that can do anything a good spell can't do. Magical machines are a crutch for lesser wizards. As these thoughts passed through my head, Baron told me about an airship called Weatherlight, on which these 3 served as crew. For the present, Gerrard was serving as the ship's captain. The craft's previous captain, Sisay, had been abducted and spirited to another world, a plane called Rath. By means of its Thran crystal, Baron observed, Weatherlight could travel to Rath, provided a sufficiently powerful wizard could be found to calibrate the crystal. Then, as Baron continued, I confess, my mind wandered a little, and I thought of travel to other planes, a fascinating prospect, and one I hope to someday achieve. She has pleaded with me to join the crew, Baron said. Who? My daughter, snapped the teacher irritably. Weren't you listening? But the Benalish has suggested that instead they take you. I agree with him. It's a chance for you to test your skills outside of Talaria. To spread my reputation beyond Talaria, I thought. Excellent. No doubt you're wondering what the problem is between my daughter and myself that keeps me from going, Baron said. I wasn't, in fact, the least bit curious, but Baron continued. All the time she's been here, she has not once met my eyes. Surely, I said hastily, this is a private matter. He looked at me steadily. Why, yes, it is, he said. I thank you for understanding that. I nodded. My daughter is an expert in magical machineries. You might want to review what you know of artifacts before you meet her. Not necessary, I assured him. Do you remember what I've said about your honesty, Ertai? Keep more of your observations to yourself. You'll do all right, I think. Better than all right, I'm sure. On my way down from the tower, I stopped in the niche where the mirror was hung. To my reflection, draped becomingly in the new tunic and chain, I said, And you have tremendous native ability. When I met the crew of the Weatherlight, they were hastily wolfing a meal, refilling water pouches and replenishing other supplies. I kept in mind what Baron had said. It was, after all, better for them to discover my remarkable talents for themselves, and gradually so they might not be too overcome. After a first course of roasted duck, I sat in silence, only nodding now and then as Baron introduced me and praised my skills. The 3 travelers each spoke in turn of their personal histories. When Gerrard told me of his mastery of arms, I did not note how meager an accomplishment this was compared to my mastery of a more difficult subject at, frankly, a somewhat younger age. When Hannah told me of her archaeological studies at an Argivian university and her interest in artifacts, I did not casually instruct her in the vast limitations of artifacts. When Miri mentioned that she had, with difficulty, learned to cast lightning, I did not call her attention to the many Talarian children who do so easily before the age of 8. All 3 recounted their long journey to Talaria and the storm-tossed sea. They had trouble lifting the magical veil that hides the island from most mortal eyes. Hannah had been born here, but that had helped hardly at all. Merfolk attacked them, and then, after they left their ship moored on the shore, they struggled through life, sapping pendril mists to the island's sunny heart. I thought of sympathizing with what must have been an ordeal for a party with such limited abilities. Instead, I merely observed that Gerrard had not mentioned his own magical training. You can feel that I've had some experience in the magical arts? Gerrard asked. My sense of shifting energies around people is unusual in its subtlety. It's true, Baron said. He seemed pleased I was apparently on the right track toward correcting what was supposed to be a shortcoming, though I still thought that honesty could hardly be counted as a flaw. Ertai has, Baron continued, tremendous native ability. That may be so, said his daughter, but our needs are specialized. I should think your needs were general, I said. I sense no remarkable talents in any of you. Cat Warrior clicked her teeth together. She narrowed her green eyes. I think we've been insulted, she said softly. More wine, asked Baron, standing up to take up the bottle. Hannah, Miri, will you ever drop more? Ertai, give me your goblet. Insulted, I said. When is a simple truth an insult? I mean only that your enemies, by snatching your captain across the plains, demonstrate significant magical power. Do you think you can match such foes with a childish lightning bolt or two? The cat warrior stood and her chair rattled to the floor. She flexed her hands, unsheathing her claws. Easy, Mary, said Gerrard, touching her arm. To me he said, Perhaps you mean no offense, but you might choose your words more carefully. I am meticulous in my choice of words, I assured him. I always say just what I mean. Then we'll be frank, Gerrard told me. What we need is a wizard, one who can set the Thran crystal and get our ship to Rath. Can you do that? It would be far more elegant to make a direct translation to Rath to open the gate between the planes without resorting to some mere artifact. Hannah's face grew red. Artifacts, she said, are the most efficient, the most reliable. Wait, Gerrard said. Can you do that? Can you make a direct translation to Rath? Certainly. Baron raised his eyebrows at me. Not at the present, I amended, but it is within my grasp, perhaps in another year. We don't have a year, said Gerrard. Sisay needs us now. Could you set the Thran crystal aboard Weatherlight? Sir, there is no magical obstacle that was not in the end yielded to me. But the crystal— Take him! Baron shouted. He seemed surprised by his own enthusiasm and said more softly, Ertai is quite astonishing, really. Give him a try. Gerrard looked from Baron to me to Miri, who still had not reclaimed her seat, but it was Hannah, staring intently at her empty plate, who spoke. She said, We'll take him if he passes a test. As a volunteer for Weatherlight crew, I expected nothing in return except whatever fame my exploits would invariably bring me, and the crew expected me to submit to a test. Baron had already declined to join them. Other adepts, even those recently promoted, would expect payment in gold, and Weatherlight did not offer gold to its crew. I was not only their best choice, but their only choice. Obviously. The obvious, unfortunately, was not something they easily grasped. Gerrard and Hannah joined Miri in insisting upon this test, so a few hours later I found myself on a hilltop where they joined me. The cat warrior eyed me narrowly, twitching her tail. Hannah, with a sack slung over her shoulder, looked sullen, and only Gerrard wore a trace of a smile, perhaps a sign that he, at least, was aware of the irony that the likes of them should test me. Like Hannah, he carried something in a bag, something spherical in the size of a garden mirror. In the vale below, a fog was gathering. I kept an eye on it, for Talarian fogs can be dangerous. The test is simple, Hannah said, setting down her burden. She opened the bag and withdrew an ordinary-looking stone. It's an oral exam. You'd rather I talked than gave a demonstration, I said. I looked at Gerrard. What kind of test is that? But the master-at-arms said nothing. Hannah handed me the stone. Identify this. It's a rock, I said, looking at it, and not even a clean one. I handed it back to her. She frowned. Nothing special about it? I had detected some spectral flow, some energetic flux in the stone, but nothing remarkable. It might be used to power an artifact, I supposed, but as artifacts were beneath my notice, I shook my head. Doesn't interest me at all. It is said to have come from a lost Acacian tomb. From the trash heap of history, I said. Why muck about in the past, woman, when you can invent the present to create the future? Hannah looked at me sternly. The Argivian University taught me two things. Always look to the past and never dismiss what appears to be useless. My education, I replied, has taught me considerably more than two things. The cat warrior gave a laugh, cut off at the glare from Hannah. I smiled. If I'd made one of them laugh, it was a sign that I was winning them over. From the bag, Hannah withdrew the helmet of some sort, but one that was unwearable. Mounted inside was a stone similar to the one she had just given me, though this one glowed. What I showed you was a mind stone, unmounted, she said. Control this, and you can power one or two small artifacts. But why would one want to control any artifacts at all? Why rely on some dead tinkerer's construction when you can conjure by your own wits? The fog below us, I noticed, was shifting in rather unpleasant ways, as if something were being born from within it. Come, ask me to demonstrate something worthy. Hannah shoved the mounted mind stone back into her bag and hastily threw a short rod. There was some twisty wire work at one end. What's this? I handled it distastefully, though it was cleaner than the stone had been. Another artifact, I said. I tapped the end without wires. The effect emanates here. But what effect? Nothing I care about, I assure you. Gerrard laughed. I don't believe this. This was a strange thing to say. He could rely absolutely on anything I said, and I told him so. Strangely, he laughed again. It's the null rod, Hannah said. Named appropriately, I said. A rod of nothing. It's extremely useful, she insisted. Miri was watching the mists, which coiled and writhed, then were still. There's something in the fog, she said. Not yet, I said. What? Hannah cut her off. I've disabled the null rod. If it were active, then several of the other artifacts wouldn't work at all. It creates a countering field of nothing I can't do better myself, I told her. And as for making the other artifacts stop working, you can do the same by dropping them from a great height. These are great and rare inventions, Hannah snapped. She took the bag that Gerrard had been holding and uncovered the globe with it. It was a ball of metal strips, though gaps in the middle. I saw gears and springs. Do you know what this is? How can I press upon you the simple truth that I do not care what it is? I said, perhaps a bit more sharply than I intended. I give up, Hannah said, turning to Gerrard. He knows the names of nothing, the history of nothing, and hasn't a clue about how things work. How's he ever going to set the Thran crystal? If it's necessary, if some mechanical trick is the only way to do something, I assured her, I'll find a way. Her arrogance irritated. The only lesson she'd understand was an object one. Putting my hands behind my back, I cast a web that Baron called abeyance. In truth, I said to Hannah, I doubt that you yourself can make this ball of scrap metal do anything impressive. Scrap metal? You call a chimeric sphere scrap metal? She set her jaw, drew the mounted mind stone from its bag, and tried to shift the shape of the sphere. With my spell in place, the metal warped and twisted itself, momentarily grew head and wings, but collapsed back into its unimpressive shape. Well, said Gerrard. Hannah tried again and again. Her energies only partly charged the sphere, then collapsed in upon themselves. She looked at Gerrard, then eyed me with suspicion. I can't. That's the difference between us, I said mildly. Can't is not a word you'll hear me say. You gotta like his confidence, Gerrard said, laughing. It's confidence well earned, I said. Look, I waved my hands at the sky, a cone of flame, gyred and twisted with orange intensity. Where's the artifact that matches that or this? If your enemies attack you from across the distant plains, what artifact will burn them as they cross? The cone burned itself out. I cast Aether Flash. Earth and sky flickered red. The gateway between plains is set afire. Your enemies would sizzle before their feet touched ground. The energies of these spells dissipated. I disenchanted my own web of abeyance and cast a final, longer-lasting spell. In a puff of smoke, my familiar settled upon my shoulder, red eyes peering at my examiners. Miri laughed. That spotted blue lizard meant to impress us? He's small, I said, but you're equal in battle. She bared her claws. Again the insults. I threw up my hands. You perplex me. I ask you again, where's the insult in a simple truth? Can you summon other beings? Gerrard asked. I can summon a djinn, I told him. I did not mention that the creature was almost as dangerous to me as to anyone I might turn it against. Perhaps, after all, Baron was right that some honesty was excessive. You can't be planning to take him, Hannah cried. He's hopeless with artifacts. From the corner of my eye, I saw something gray gliding through the sky. Miri turned to face it at the same time I did. A tendril had parted from the fog in the valley, and at the end of the tendril was a ghost, a mist phantom with teeth and claws that glittered like ice or steel. Hannah saw it too. Fog elemental, she said. Dangerous? Gerrard asked. Only when they're in a wicked mood, I observed. That's the only mood they ever seem to be in. The elemental was drifting in a circle around us, perhaps selecting its prey. Miri's sword rang as she drew it from its long scabbard. "Not much hope in that," I said. "It's powerful. Gets in one strike before it melts into an ordinary vapor, but that blow would be enough for any of us." The elemental seemed to have decided upon its target. Silently, it swelled and opened its wide, vaporous arms and began to spiral nearer. "Ertai," Gerrard said, "it's your best chance to impress me." I thought quickly. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps it was time to impress all of them. Anna was reaching into her bag. I snatched it from her. "Hey!" And I had just drained the energy from the mounted Mind Stone, but the unmounted, dirty as it was, had an untapped charge. I looked at the chimeric sphere, feeling for spectral lines in the Mind Stone and the metal ball. The fog elemental spun closer. "What are you doing?" Hannah said. "Let me have that." Wings sprang to shape on the sphere. "Not the sphere!" Hannah cried. "I have a better—" I turned my shoulder to her, keeping the bag out of reach. "You wanted a test!" I snapped. My control was imperfect as I set the wings to buzzing. Imperfect, but why should it be any better when, as I say, artifacts are beneath my notice? I managed. The sphere lifted into the air as the fog elemental made a sound like a long inward rush of breath. Glittering claws descended and closed on metal. There was sound of metal bands snapping, springs cracking, and rivets creaking until they popped. The elemental melted into mist, and what was left of the chimeric sphere fell to the ground with a crash. I handed the stone to Hannah and brushed the dirt from my palms. "You might clean that rock," I said. "It's quite unpleasant to handle." "My sphere!" She ran to kneel beside it. Turning to Gerrard, I said, "I trust I've proven my ability?" "Oh, it's been quite a demonstration," said the Master-at-Arms. "Thank you," I said, and I bowed.
"You've upset my daughter,"
Baron told me in his study. "Some people are ill-equipped to encounter their own limitations," I sighed.
Yes,"
Baron answered. "I look forward to joining the ship."
Ertai, I hope that when you meet the rest of the crew, you'll be careful to make a favorable impression."
"Of course. They will quite naturally admire my abilities."
Yes," he said again. "But perhaps you might make some effort beyond just being yourself. After all, what would you do if there were a clash of styles, as it were, as they asked you to return to Dominaria?"
"You mean dismiss me?"
I laughed at the idea. "I'm serious."
Baron was getting old, and the old sometimes have curious ideas. I humored him. "Baron, you've been a most excellent teacher. I shall take your advice." He looked relieved, and I did as he suggested. When I followed the trio back to their ship, I made an effort to connect in the most friendly way with the other crew members. Indeed, they were only company available to me since Hannah spent too much of her time fiddling with that chimeric sphere. Gerrard was brooding in his cabin, and Miri had curiously lost the ability to speak. Perhaps she was ill. The Minotaur, who busied himself with the ship's rigging, was easily drawn into conversation. I admired the construction of the Weatherlight, a subject about which he was quite enthusiastic. I shared my suggestions for how the ship might be improved, but I changed the subject when his mind seemed to wander. I asked why he was not decorated with scars, as Minotaurs always are.
"You think of the Hulu," he said. "Abtalru. We do not scar our bodies and our horns. It's abomination before Toran."
"Toran should reconsider," I said. "Decorations improve a Minotaur." He returned to working on the rigging, no doubt considering my advice. Aurum was the ship's healer. I overheard her fussing about the clutter of ointments and powders in her quarters, so while she was above decks, I did her the favor of sorting through her pharmacy and throwing out things I knew to be useless. I offered to arrange what remained alphabetically, but she said I had helped quite enough. And finally, there was a goblin. I played a friendly joke on him, showing him the eel-skin pouch I carry and asking if he did not think it was exactly the right color to be made of goblin skin. I did not, of course, actually lie to him. I am scrupulously honest. I think my jest made an impression upon him. In fact, and I say this with all modesty, I have made an impression upon them all. I hadn't given it much thought before, but without the slightest effort, I seem to have a knack for making first impressions. It may prove to be another thing besides magic, for which I have tremendous native ability.
Here ends the tale of Ertai.
A dark room. Was Ertai the last of the Weatherlight's crew to come aboard? Asked Ilcaster.
No, replied his master. They went to Urborg to pick up Crovax, they found before the crypt of his family. All his family had been slain by the denizens of Rath, and the estate itself was in ruins. Crovax, too, was twisted and bitter, yearning for his lost Selenia. He came on board, vowing destruction against Volrath as much as loyalty to Sisay.
The old man sighed, and his hand absently ruffled his pupil's hair.
Hate is a terrible curse, Ilcaster. It destroys those whom it consumes. That is the true tragedy of Volrath himself, and it became the tragedy of Crovax.
The boy twisted impatiently. But what happened, Master?
They had one more passenger to pick up. Stark. The master raised his hand. I know, but they needed his knowledge of Rath.
But Master, surely as treacherous as Stark was...
Treacherous he certainly was, but Stark was equally as treacherous toward Volrath.
What do you mean that, Master? Stark was working for Volrath, wasn't he?
True, but people change, and Stark had been through many changes over the years. First he had been Wool's mentor, urging him to kill his father, and Gerrard, always pushing him toward the dark destiny that awaited him. Then when Wool was transformed into Volrath, Stark became the Evankar's loyal servant. But one should never forget that Stark was also working for those whom Volrath served, the Phyrexians. And soon he realized that Volrath might not serve their interests as much as his own selfish ends. Stark fled from Volrath to Dominaria. It was there he learned that his daughter, Takara, had been taken hostage by the Evankar.
Ilcaster nodded. Yes, you said something about that earlier, that was why Stark maneuvered Sisay's kidnapping so that Gerrard would go to Rath.
The old man snorted. Stark was trying to play both sides against the middle. In fact, from his point of view, he would win no matter what happened. If Volrath captured and killed Gerrard, Stark would get the credit as the one who had lured the Legacy's heir into Rath. And if Gerrard killed Volrath, well, Takara would be free, and Stark, too, would be liberated from the Evankar's control. Finding Stark wasn't easy for Gerrard and Weatherlight's crew. He was a prisoner, a warlord named Meraxus, sent by Volrath to keep an eye on him. In the warlord's hands, he twisted and turned, looking for a way to save his life, turn the situation to his profit. He was prepared to sell Gerrard to Meraxus, and Meraxus to Volrath, and Sisay to anyone. Nonetheless, Weatherlight's crew succeeded in snatching him away from Meraxus. The warlord gave chase, pursuing Gerrard, Miri, and Tongarth, the three who had rescued Stark, through a series of narrow, twisting canyons. At first light, they were cornered by the warlord's army. As the hulking figure of Meraxus stepped towards them, Stark pulled free of Miri's restraining hands and threw himself face down before Meraxus. He whined that he had personally led Gerrard to his friends into a trap just so Meraxus could destroy them, fulfilling the plans of Volrath, their mutual master.
Ilcaster's mouth was open.
What a horrible thing to do! He cried. What treachery! What?
The old man nodded his head again and lifted his hand.
Well, such is the nature of those who betray. Once they begin, they find it difficult to stop. Such perhaps was the case with Stark. He saw the world through a series of twisted, tortured angles, all converging upon himself. That, after all, was always his primary goal, to preserve his own miserable skin.
The librarian chuckled.
Fortunately, just at this point, as Meraxus' soldiers were advancing on Gerrard and his companions, as they drew their swords, prepared to sell their lives as dearly as possible, there was a great shadow from above. Weatherlight dropped from the sky upon the soldiers of the warlord, crushing some, frightening others. Like all bullies, they fled in disorder, leaving behind only Meraxus himself. Knowing that if he failed, he would have to face Volrath's anger, Meraxus rushed upon Gerrard, sword drawn, and the two thrust and hacked at each other,
the noise of their battle echoing through the surrounding canyon. As Gerrard battled the warlord, seeking only to defend himself, Stark had one last bit of treachery up his sleeve. Appearing suddenly from behind a boulder, he buried his dagger in his captor's back.
Ilcaster gasped, then laughed aloud.
"Served him right," he said. "Yes," agreed the master. Gerrard was angered by the dishonorable killing, but he forced Stark to agree to guide the ship to Rath. Together, they boarded the ship, and so, at last, they set out toward the unknown plain.